mourn with me a while. Mourn with me a while. Stay with me tonight at the foot of the cross, gazing upon his lifeless body, trying to understand. Come and mourn with me a while. Tenebrae. It means darkness or shadows. The Tenebrae service, or the service of shadows, dates from the 8th century and commemorates the suffering and death of Christ. The service represents the darkness that fell over the whole earth as Jesus was crucified. Candles symbolize Christ, who is our light and the light of the world. They are used in impressive ceremonies at Christmas to symbolize the coming of the light. They are used during Tenebrae to signify the fading of the light as Christ was leaving the world. We now begin the service of shadows.
The shadow of betrayal. When it was evening, Jesus and the 12 disciples sat down to eat. During the meal, Jesus said, "I tell you, one of you will betray me." The disciples were very upset and began to ask him, one after the other, "Surely, Lord, you don't mean me." Jesus answered, "One who dips his bread in the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man will die as the scriptures say he will, but how terrible for that man who will betray the Son of Man. It would have been better for that man if he had never been born." Judas the traitor spoke up. "Surely, teacher, you don't mean me?" he asked. Jesus answered, "So you say."
The shadow of agony and arrest. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there to pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee. Grief and anguish came over him, and he said to them, "The sorrow in my heart is so great that it almost crushes me. Stay here and keep watch with me." He went a little further on, threw himself face downward on the ground, and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, take this cup of suffering from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." Then he returned to the 3 disciples and found them asleep. And he said to Peter, "How is it that you 3 were not able to keep watch with me for even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Once more, Jesus went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cup of suffering cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done." He returned once more and found the disciples asleep. They could not keep their eyes open. Again, Jesus left them, went away and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same words. Then he returned to the disciples and said, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be handed over to the power of sinners. Get up, let's go. Look, here is the man who is betraying me." Jesus was still speaking when Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs and sent by the chief priests and the elders. The traitor had given the crowd a signal, "The man I kiss is the one you want. Arrest him." Jesus went straight to Judas to Jesus and said, "Peace be with you, teacher," and kissed him. Jesus answered, "Be quick about it, friend." Then they came up, arrested Jesus, and held him tight.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
The shadow of denial. Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard when one of the high priest's servant women came to him and said, "You too were with Jesus of Galilee." But he denied it in front of them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he answered, and went on out to the entrance of the courtyard. Another servant woman saw him and said to the men there, "He was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again Peter denied it and answered, "I swear that I don't know that man." After a little while, the men standing there came to Peter. "Of course you are one of them," they said. "After all, the way you speak gives you away." Then Peter said, "I swear that I am telling the truth. May God punish me if I am not. I do not know that man." Just then a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered what Jesus had told him. "Before the rooster crows, you will say 3 times that you do not know me." He went out and wept bitterly.
The shadow of accusation. Jesus stood before the Roman governor, who questioned him. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked. "So you say," answered Jesus. But he said nothing in response to the accusations of the chief priests and the elders. So Pilate said to him, "Don't you hear all these things they accuse you of?" But Jesus refused to answer a single word, with the result that the governor was greatly surprised. The chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask Pilate to set Barabbas free and have Jesus put to death. But Pilate asked the crowd, "Which one of these 2 do you want me to set free for you?" "Barabbas," they answered. "What then shall I do with Jesus called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. "Crucify him," they all answered. But Pilate asked, "What crime has he committed?" Then they started shouting at the top of their voice, "Crucify him!" When Pilate saw that it was no use to go on, but that a riot might break out, he took some water, washed his hands in front of the crowd, and said, "I am not responsible for the death of this man. This is your doing." The crowd answered, "Let the responsibility of his death fall on us and our children." Then Pilate set Barabbas free for them and after he had Jesus whipped, he handed him over to be crucified. Then Pilate's soldiers took Jesus into the governor's palace, and the whole company gathered around him. They stripped off his clothes and put a scarlet robe on him. Then they made a crown out of a thorny branch and placed it on his head, and put a stick in his right hand. Then they knelt before him and made fun of him. "Long live the King of the Jews," they said.
Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree?
The shadow of crucifixion and humiliation. When they had finished making fun of him, they took the robe off and put his clothes back on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine mixed with a bitter substance, but after tasting it, he would not drink it. They crucified him and then divided his clothes among them by throwing dice. After that, they sat there and watched him. Above his head, they put the written notice of the accusation against him. "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then they crucified two bandits with Jesus, one on his right and the other on his left. People passing by shook their heads and hurled insults at Jesus. "You were going to tear down the temple and build it back up in 3 days. Save yourself if you're God's son. Come on down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law and the elders made fun of him. "He saved others, but he cannot save himself. Isn't he the King of Israel? If he will come down off the cross now, we will believe in him. He trusts in God and claims to be God's son. Well then, let's see if God wants to save him now."
Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when the sun refused to shine?
At noon, the whole country was covered with darkness, which lasted for 3 hours. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud shout, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why did you abandon me?" Some of the people standing there heard him and said, "He is calling out for Elijah." One of them ran up once, took a sponge, soaked it in cheap wine, put it on the end of a stick, and tried to make him drink it. But the others said, "Wait, let's see if Elijah is coming to save him." Jesus again gave a loud cry and breathed his last. Then the curtain hanging in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split apart, the graves broke open, and many of God's people who had died were raised to life. They left the graves, and after Jesus rose from the dead, they went into the city where many people saw them. When the army officer and the soldiers with him who were watching Jesus saw the earthquake and everything else that had happened, they were terrified and said, "He really was the Son of God."
Were you there when they pierced him in the side? Were you there when they pierced him in the side? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they pierced him in the side?
Shadow of burial. When it was evening, a rich man from Arimathea arrived. His name was Joseph, and he also was a disciple of Jesus. He went into the presence of Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate gave orders for the body to be given to Joseph. So Joseph took it, wrapped it in a new linen cloth, and placed it in his own tomb, which he had just recently dug out of solid rock. Then he rolled a large stone across the entrance of the tomb and went away.
Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble.
small yet persistent flame of Christ's candle. We anticipate the ultimate picture of life over death. This concludes our service this evening. And it is my prayer for each and every one of you. And may Christ, who is willing to go to the ultimate price paid of death, who is willing even to suffer death on the cross for our sake, may that same Christ, may his Spirit be with you this evening and forever.
We need to sing along. There's so much emotion. And you sing, it is absolute.